Ladies and gentlemen, today, well, let's face it, mostly gentlemen, but there's a few ladies as a, women respecter. But anyways, today we are going to do an old school rant video. Remember those back in the day? Now this one's going to be, I can't describe it. It is everything wrong with the Canadian political establishment. We're going to mine the depths, but into the coal mines of anti-Canadian, anti-Laurentian elite takes. Remember those old school videos I used to do? You people used to love them, I think. Now, this is one of the most mind-boggling things I have ever come across, okay? One of the most mind-boggling articles ever. And I simply do not have words for it. But you have to realize that the average Canadian liberal elite, this is what they think. This is as much as they are driven towards anti-Americanism. They basically are just spiritual Democrats from America. And all of their information is filtered through that lens. This is incredible. I have no words for it. But we'll get through this together, okay? Because all of the geo cells out there, we're gonna get through this together. Here we go. Oh my god. I don't know. I'm not gonna place. Yeah, let's pause it. Let's have, just before we get into it, let's have our moment of zen by looking at Donald J. Trump. Okay, this is incredible. Canada, I can't do this. I can't. Canada mulling game plan if U.S. takes far right authoritarian Melanie Jolly. So she's the foreign affairs. This is the caliber of technocrat that Justin Trudeau's Canada has produced. Basically, this is a massive amount of projection on the part of Canadian libs, on the part of the left in Canada, because there really is no right-wing opposition. And this is, of course, CTV. Now, CTV is a precarious position after after the convoys. They had to outlib the state-funded, state-run CBC with absolutely mind-boggling takes such as this. All right, so Dylan Robertson, the Canadian press, the Canadian depress. I always used to love how Michael Savage would say, "Meet the depress," the Canadian depress. Anyways, this is not a long article, but it's packed with a lot of assumptions, and well, you'll see. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Jolly says Canada has been considering a game plan for how it would respond if the United States took a far-right authoritarian shift after next year's election. Oh my god. Yeah, so first of all, right off the bat, does Canada really have any power in that equation if based world were to be achieved? It doesn't seem likely. We're considering working on scenarios, Jolly said in French, of course in French, because they assume that Americans don't know anything, that the Washington establishment will, get confused by virtue of the fact that, she's speaking in French. See, here's what they do, okay? Because the vast majority of Canadians, shocking, right? The vast majority of Canadians don't know the second official language, but they do this thing. Even Justin Trudeau has been accused of this, where they will say absolutely incredibly insane things in French, because the majority of Anglophone Canada, by Anglophone, I mean people that are not heritage Anglophone Canadians, but are Canadians nevertheless. They will say things that are absolutely insane in French because they know that the vast majority of people, they'll have to rely on translations and whatnot. Added that Ottawa's close political and economic ties to the U.S. means that we must certainly prepare several scenarios. Listen, if Canada in any single way, in even the smallest way, was a threat to the United States, if based world were to be achieved in the U.S., I don't think that any scenario they plan for is going to work. But anyways, she suggests Canada has a game plan in mind, but wouldn't go into detail. Of course, we'll get into details. In general, there are a game plan and precisely be able to manage what could be rather a difficult situation. I will work with my colleagues and with the mayors, the provincial premiers, with the business community, with the unions, with everyone in the country, so we are ready regardless of the election outcome. Why do you care? Oh, that's right, because Canada loves to have Canadian libs love this grandiose idea during Donald Trump, especially with Trudeau in office, where they are the leaders of the free world, that they're the ones holding the mantle for freedom and we're the real rules-based liberal order, when America's abdicated their role as the liberal empire, even though Trump, like, let's face it, momentarily put a little bit of grease on the wheel, not grease, but put a little bit of sand on the wheel of the sort of liberal empire rules based order. And even though the functioning of the empire went, listen, this pains me to say this as a fan of Trump, but even though the functioning of the empire still went a certain way, anyways, let's not kid ourselves, okay? For example, funding in Ukraine. Like, I remember this one thread. I keep going back to this time and again. The one thread when the war was declared by Gary Kasparov about how Trump was committing borderline G-word eyed by not giving them arms in time. Those arms shipments, they went along regardless, even with the whole the current president's son, not to get into details, even with that going on, Trump still reneged. So Jolly drew an analogy to her government's experience working with the administration. Of course, it all goes back to Trump, the evil Trump, who sought to limit long-established trade in crucial sectors. A lot of those were reversed, even though Trump tried the America First thing. But, Trump is again running for the Republican nomination, which he probably will win. Let's face it. If he isn't in jail, he probably will win. In next November's election, as promised retribution against his opponents and civil servants on, oh my God, based? Well, let's see. I mean, Trump's rhetoric is obviously always been more powerful, but the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa declined to comment on Jolly's remark. Of course, because you have this utterly insane string of assertions that could, if Trump did get elected, could cause severe problems for an economically, socially, and even culturally dependent nation that Canada is to America. The U.S. Embassy in Ottawa declined to comment. University of Ottawa national security professor Thomas Jeannot said many Canadians might find it far-fetched to talk about Washington falling drastically out of step. See, we say it couldn't happen here, but it happened. Like, this is the liberal assumption of everything. It is big. You know what I mean? But he said there has been an extreme rise in global volatility in recent years. He said in a Thursday interview, what would have been extremely far-fetched scenario maybe 10 years ago? Oh, well, you mean 10 years ago under Obama? Or when Obama was carrying out the same policies as George W. Bush? Yeah. Today we are not impossible anymore. But of course, when Obama was interfering in Canadian affairs, when Obama was bombing Libya, when Obama was staging color revolutions around the world, that was perfectly fine. But when Trump gets in there, the evil, scary symbol of far-right authoritarianism that is probably working with the Kremlin, right? Jeannot said Canada could face the prospect of political refugees, economic protection. Oh my God. Economic protectionism in one of the largest trading relationships in the world, and shocked to Ottawa's reliance on U.S. foreign intelligence sharing and scientific cooperation. You realize Canada is basically just like the 51st state, if that would ever happen? If Canada decided to live out even harder and be like, you know what? We don't like the Washington administration. America's just going to go, what are you going to do about it? I'm sorry. As much as I should defend my own nation, that's just the reality of power politics. Okay. I'd have to read John Mersheimer to know what would happen. There wouldn't even be a question. America would just have to snarl a little bit. And if that happened, oh my God, those factors don't include missile defense and military protection. And this is where things get, you'll see how crazy this article gets. If an increasingly authoritarian U.S. is increasingly unilaterally and dismissive of traditional alliances like NATO, sacred NATO, or arrangements like NORAD, how does this damage your security? Jeannot said. He said another question would be around American intervention into Canadian democratic. Already, far-right politicians in the U.S. voiced support for the Freedom Convoy. Yes, okay. So here's the thing, because this is what every activist, leftist group and activist account in Canada, this is their grand assertion where they have to play stepping stone to politicians in America into Canada, where they say that Pierre Palavra talks to dangerous far-right politicians in Canada. You know what these dangerous far-right politicians are? They're Republican lobbyists, okay? Now, here's the thing. Interference in the Canadian election. Canada being a doorstep away, like literally on the border with America, and Canada not having any organic right wing of its own. And every single person who wants to make anything on the political right, technically, in Canada, they all flee to America because they realize the situation is hopeless. So now you have a populist movement that is basically hated and persecuted and made into a political enemy in Canada. Republicans in America signal boost this movement because it does affect them as well when it comes to trade issues. Somehow this is like dangerous foreign interference. But this very article by Canadian politicians and technocrats say that if America goes quote unquote far right, then they are comfortable with also interfering into American affairs by using outside forces within other NATO nations to do this. Does that make any sense? And I know that it's hypocrisy and all this crap, but like literally, this is the most harebrained string of assertions from an utterly powerless political power in the face of the American empire. He said another question would be American intervention. At the time, Texas Attorney General, an Attorney General for one of the biggest states in America, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a little meatball Ron, again, leader of one of the biggest states with, by the way, one of the largest diasporas of Canadians, Florida, who is now running against Trump for Republican presidential nomination, both fought against attempts to prevent Americans from donating to convoy protests. I wonder why. Because an unjust political machine in Parliament Hill has deemed ordinary Canadians a state of exception. And of course, they're going to help them out. But when leftoids do it, though, when leftoids cooperate with other leftist organizations and other nations, that's perfectly acceptable, though. In September 2021, the Liberals promised to create a Canadian Center for Global Democracy to shore up like-minded countries. To shore up like-minded countries in the age of rising authoritarianism, but the project is not yet launched. NDP foreign affairs critic Heather McPherson, who's, by the way, not the brightest star in the northern sky, said it's only logical that Ottawa plans for an aggressive Washington. She said Canada would benefit from stronger ties with other allies, even if ends up remaining on good terms with the U.S. So Donald Trump is a scourge on Democrat. Donald Trump's a scourge on democracy across the world, said McPherson. Frankly, Canada better have a plan for a decline in American democracy. What are you going to do about it? Again, what are you going to do about it? So on one hand, if America, how dare American Republicans, who are mainstream elected politicians, by the way, that a significant majority of the far right in America hates, not even the far right, but your average like MAGA boomer is now turning on little meatball Ron and the Texas Attorney General in an increasingly purple state, Texas. These are not like cartoonish certain organizations that have optics problems on the right way. These are mainstream Republican politicians. How dare they try to facilitate a democratic protest movement in a brother nation? But when America makes a right-wing turn, Canada now feels itself having a license to make plans and to help other allies interfere in American affairs. Pretty stupid, right? Meanwhile, Jeunesse said he hasn't heard of other countries saying publicly they have contingency plans if Uncle Sam takes an authoritarian term. Yeah, I wonder why, because that's insane. That is utterly insane. This is very sensitive for any democracy or democratic ally of the U.S. My guess is that any ally will be very discreet about this. I wonder why. Because again, like this is literally saying that the country that has the most amount of power over the not just political affairs, but the average lives of Canadians in so many different ways, that you're going to openly resist this Leviathan somehow. I don't know. Like, this is incredible. Generally, Canada's allies have used language focused on the risk of America's withdrawing from the world stage. France's ambassador to Canada said last April that closer ties between Ottawa and Europe could protect both from Washington pulling inward. This nagging question of the future of American commitment offers, in any case more than ever, the opportunity for Europe, France, and Canada to play a role together. Michel Millet said in France at the Montreal Council on Foreign Relations, I guess America robbing any future prospects for Western Europe's economy to fight the war against Russia. Yes, I'm sure they're going to pull out of their commitments, right? Europeans and Canadians have this very weird paradox. Sorry, the libs of Europe and Canada have this very weird complex where it's either govern me harder, daddy, and take away all prospects I have to fight against global fascist authoritarianism, or we're deathly afraid of the center-right aspects of that same said liberal empire. It's a very schizophrenic and incoherent position. He cites the Iraq War, Barack Obama's Democratic administration opting against intervention. You mean to tell me Obama waging a secret intelligence agency-driven war in Syria and elsewhere, that is a disengagement? Oh, and here we go. Here is the greatest lie ever. The limited pushback to Russia's 2014 takeover of Ukraine's Crimea region and the chaotic U.S. exit from Afghanistan. The withdrawal from the world stage initiated under Obama and amplified under Trump has proved disastrous and has created a vacuum quickly filled by the rival powers and opened a field of expansion for Russia, Miralay said at the time. So here's the end of the article. This is insane. Oh, and by the way, this is Melanie Joly. I'm sure she's a very competent bureaucrat. Wink, wink, I'm sure. August 17, 2023. And people wanted me to comment on this. This is an absolutely insane statement because it has to ignore so many political realities that have happened since 2014 onwards, even before with Syria, even before with Libya. So the Obama administration basically trying to destroy Syria by using Islamist rebels, John McCain shaking the hand of former Taliban leaders and former ISIS leaders, and training and funding both left-wing mercenary and far-right paramilitaries in Ukraine since 2014, when Russia was serious about taking a territory that, by all historical precedent, well, I don't know how much I can say on YouTube, repeatedly training to NATO standards a Ukrainian military. There was this other tweet. There was this NATO animation, like typical neoliberal kitsch animation where it's, saying that the Russian war of aggression and how they, intervened, and how NATO is a defensive alliance that's so heckin' wholesome and doesn't mean to do any harm. It's so heckin' wholesome that they don't mean to do any harm, even though they promised way back in the 1990s that they wouldn't move an inch eastward. And Bill Clinton laughed in Vladimir Putin's face and said, you know that NATO is about you, right? And the community notes basically ratioed NATO in the Twitter thread, which I could put in the description. So not only did the Obama administration intervene in Syria, intervened in Libya, and intervened in Ukraine, but now the Canadian lib establishment is so far out to lunch that they are trying to say that Obama wasn't an imperial leader enough, that he didn't govern world affairs hard enough. You realize how insane that is. But this is what the Chrystia Freeland, Melanie Joly, Justin Trudeau, Gerald Butts administration on Parliament Hill, that is what they believe. They have this grandiose liberal narcissism about governing this quote-unquote rules-based order. And they say that how dare conservatives empathize with their fellow conservatives in another Anglosphere country that is right on their border protesting unjust measures, that is a grave threat to democracy, and the evil far right is basically pulling another Russiagate in Canada. But now it's Trump, it's MAGA Trumplings, little orange tiny hand Trumpolini. Yeah, I love those boomer liberal. I just love those boomer liberal quips for Trump. Anyway, it's so insane, and it's a fundamental ignorance of history, and it's quite terrifying because these are the these are like the middling, midwit, 110 IQ, hysteric and histrionic people that are running Canada. If America ever decided to become more nativistic, more protectionistic, decided to be non-interventionist on the world stage, and realized that maybe power in Washington is kind of waning, and maybe it's not a good idea to basically wage a soft power culture war against your own citizenry, then I don't know. I think that the prospects of Canada navigating in such a world where they're openly hostile to a more right-shifted, protectionist Washington, they can make any plan they want. But it's a total flying in the face of any responsible geopolitical maneuvering because of the way that things are set up in relations between Canada and America. It's a total floundering using a incredibly histrionic interpretation of their own ideology. And it will just basically, if this all happened, which it probably won't, considering the state of Washington. But in some faraway land, if based world were achieved, if Donald Trump was elected again, based world was achieved in America, and he actually kind of was competent this time, and he actually did kind of get the right people basically to drain the swamp, then Canada would be at the mercy of its political elites that have no sense of geopolitical gravitas, that have no sense of maneuvering. And the average Canadian would be at the mercy of a Parliament Hill that will choose its own incredibly disappointing global liberal ideology over any sort of realpolitik. So I just wanted to do this little rant to just because people were requesting it and it's absolutely insane. And maybe I might get back to the shorter videos. So thank you all. God bless. Goodbye. Too sweet.